Okay, so good morning to you. Good morning to your guests. It's great to be as part of this panel. I'm just hoping that I'll be able to give you some quick insight into the Presidential Climate Commission before we move on to the actual topic of how we seek to institutionalize skills development in within the just energy transition. So just a quick update on the PCC. It's that it's been established by the president. It's an independent, multi-stakeholder body. It's largely being geared to drive the role of facilitating a common vision, a common agenda for a just, net zero, climate resilient economy, where we try to bring whole of society on board and try to reach broad consensus. The PCC's work is open and is transparent. I mean, most of our meetings and our engagements are broadcast live. We seek to ensure transparency in order to build trust towards leading to social consensus. I think trust is a very critical component of that. And we do a lot of this work by providing evidence-based research to those critical decision makers to drive the climate agenda, to drive mitigation goals and adaptation goals for the just transition. The commission is made up of 33 commissioners, 10 of which are ministers, and these are ministers whose portfolios are directly impacted by the energy transition and climate change. We have 23 commissioners from the private sector, from the three federations, labor federations, from research organizations, civil society, NGOs. So it's a broad spectrum of representatives on the commission. The evidence-based research that we do largely feeds towards government's decision-making processes, and this goes as a form of a recommendation to the president, which is then tabled in cabinet. We use a lot of the research that we do to guide debates and discussions towards forging consensus around very complex issues on the just transition. And then lastly, we enable action. And, we do this by influencing policy. We try to, where action falls short, we try to lean in, provide advice, and guide towards some form of implementation. Our work largely revolves around the just transition, climate mitigation, adaptation, and finance. The just transition, as you're all aware, speaks largely to leaving no one behind. So it's an entire society shift. Yeah, so basically, the PCC focuses on three areas, the three I's, which is insight, inclusion, and impact. Insight largely speaks to the research work we do, and what I flagged in here is some of the critical work that we're doing right now in the PCC, which looks at employment and skill strategies, the net zero pathway, grid pricing and studies, water, food, and built environment studies, which largely speaks to our adaptation and resilience work, and finance tracking. Inclusion is where we try to build in and the procedural justice element of the just transition. And this is about getting as much information out there, engaging with key constituents, key partners towards building broad consensus for the transition. And impact speaks to some of the initiatives we're working on in order to have a just transition. And this speaks to the very strongly the just component, which largely looks at economic diversification, industrial policy, building capacity, not just within the key role players, but across all sectors of society. One of our key projects in here is looking at capacitating local government. I mean, it's just commonly known that local government has severe constraints. So there's a mechanism that we built in now to build this capacity around projects restructuring, etc. An important project that we're moving on now that we want to see have a profound impact on the economy is social ownership. I mean, the general thinking, for the past 24 years, workers have remained within the rat of remaining workers, not seeing themselves contributing any further to the economy. As part of this just transition, we want to see ownership patterns in the economy expand And hence, we're speaking about trying to embed social ownership through this just transition, where communities and workers begin to own parts of the economy where they either live or they work. Uh, what we see right now is basically three transitions taking place. We look at ourselves where we are right now. We're in a high climate, high vulnerability in terms of climate change. There's low productivity in terms of the economy, high carbon intensity in the economy, a weak public sector, limited implementation capacity, extreme levels of unemployment, inequality, and poverty, decreasing per capita income. And what this has done is it's laid a solid foundation for the just transition. And the way we envisage the just transition, it's like one of those many revolutions that have occurred. We had the Industrial Revolution, then we had globalization, we got 4IR. Now we envisage the just transition being very similar in that it's an entire society change. And we're hoping to capture this opportunity to directly impact and positively impact on employment levels, on poverty levels, etc. So the three transitions, which is decarbonization, which largely focuses on decarbonizing the economy, adaptation and resilience, which looks at getting society for adverse environmental impacts. And the just transition is once again looks at society in terms of capacitation for employment, skills development, social protection. And through these interrelated transitions, we're hoping that by 2050, we have an economy and society that is resilient to climate change. We have a net zero carbon economy. We have a growing economy. We have an effective and enabling state. And we see significant reduction in unemployment, inequality, and poverty. Now, when discussions began to gain momentum on the just transition, and just before the just transition framework was released, a lot of research was undertaken. And in the just transition framework, 4 sectors were identified to be most at risk. And this was the coal sector, where you see 80,000 direct jobs being lost in the mining sector, 10,000 in the energy generation sector through the coal power stations. And when you look at the entire coal value chain, you're looking at around 150 to 200,000 jobs being lost. Note that these jobs are particularly located in the coal belt of Mpumalanga. Then you have close to about 450,000 jobs being lost in the auto sector, and this is largely in Shwana, eThekwini, Eastern Cape. In agriculture, around 800,000 jobs being lost, tourism, 500,000 jobs being lost. And as you can see, these are geospatial specific. Now, how do you respond to this? And when we take these sectors at risk, and then you add to that the carbon border, carbon border adjustment tax, you see employment becomes significantly more important, as you can have a further anything between 500,000 to 700,000 jobs being lost in the South African economy. And this carbon border adjustment tax by EU will impose a tax on all South African products that are exported or imported into Europe. And this will be measured against its carbon footprint, hence making our exports less competitive. Now, to respond to this effectively, the Just Transition framework, which is government's policy around the transition, speaks to significantly upskilling and reskilling workers so that they're able to navigate the transition. Now, this in itself speaks to the distributive justice element of the just transition, and a very critical element, because it says workers and communities should not be left behind, and they should not be worse off. So that the reskilling and upskilling program, we envisage the transition of workers from their current jobs at risk to future jobs. And to achieve this, we need to understand what will the future labor market be? What is the future labor force be? Where will the jobs be created? And how will this and where will this be created geospatially across the 9 provinces? It's also very important for foundational skills through the education system to be improved so that you have an adaptive, workforce. Collectively, this provides a broad brush for the work that needs to be done within the skilling ecosystem for the just transition. But having said that, we're not just looking at the just transition and workers at risk. We envisage that through the skillings program and the skillings ecosystem that we're about to create, will have a substantive impact on the future labor market by skilling the currently unemployed, those that have lost confidence in finding jobs, to start to enter the labor market. Now, when we look at and how do we achieve this, is when you look at this particular slide, it speaks to a number of interventions that needs to be in place in order to impact sectors of the economy to have a just transition. So, looking at job creation, training capacity, infrastructure rollout, social protection, social ownership, economic inclusion, education, critically, appropriate funding and policies measures to be introduced. This will then feed into sectors of the economy, particularly power, the chemical sector, agriculture, mining, and the built environment. Collectively, this will lead to a more just transition rather than a simple energy transition. This slide guides us in terms of what needs to be done. This is the current existing ecosystem of skills. And as you can see, it has a number of state entities, whether it's government departments, state institutions, it has the private sector, it has service providers, all feeding into a nexus where we're supposed to create the skills for the markets. But over the past 20 years, we have failed to do. It has been consistently echoed that the skills in the South African economy is insufficient to grow the economy, telling us there's definitely something wrong with this entire ecosystem. So what measures need to be introduced? What needs to be done in order to correct this? And in doing so, how do we lead to ensuring that we skill for a particular occupation? And that's been the main thrust of the discussions over the last 2 years. We need to gear the skilling ecosystem for jobs. And the jobs need to be defined clearly in terms of occupations, and occupations need to speak to the skills required. Now, this we're achieving through the Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan. The Just Energy Transition Implementation Plan is the outcome of the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, which had identified or estimated that 2.7 billion rand is required for skillings for the Just Energy Transition. But that 2.7 billion rand was not in isolation. It's in over and above the existing quantum of money that goes into the skills ecosystem. Now, this speaks to roughly around 20 billion rand per year. So how do we intend to achieve this? Working within the ecosystem I've just presented, we intend to create a 3-tier JET skills ecosystem. The first is establishing a JET desk within government. So the location is still to be identified. The JET desk will be staffed with highly technical skills experts that will be able to guide policy. A tier below that would comprise of a plethora of stakeholders and partners that will serve to advise the technical experts and guide on policy. The most critical element is the level below that, which is the skills development. And this is what we consider to be the local learning network. And it is made up of primarily driven by the private sector, by the trade unions. This is to identify what are the skills required in these skills development zones. Now, these skills development zones are very specific to the technologies identified in the JET investment plan, and that is renewable energy and the transmission grid. It's the new energy vehicles, and it's hydrogen. So the skills development zones very specifically speaks to the future energy producing technologies of South Africa, and they then speak to collectively advising the technical desk of the skills that's required to ensure that these new technologies gain momentum, that they have the relevant skills, and we're able to deliver in terms of our energy needs. A fundamental element of this is building capacity within government and key government institutions. So a lot of work that's currently being done is around these areas of policy and implementation so that we're able to gear the entire ecosystem to skill for the market. And this then takes us down to we need to have the upskilling of teachers and curricula in our primary and secondary education. Chair, I'm about to conclude just to indicate some of the key initiatives that are underway right now around the just energy transition skills ecosystem. So the one is the PCC's annual skills endeavor, where we bring in thought leaders and engage on specific areas required to drive the skilling agenda for the transition. The second is a medium-term research project underway with a consortium of academic institutions to understand what will the future labor market. And based on the future labor market, what will the skills, what skills will be required? Now, this is very specific. It's a labor market per province and skills per province, and then it's aggregated at a national. So, what makes this work a little bit difficult is looking at new economic opportunities that's to emerge. So that is economic activity that don't exist. There's no significant market. There's no significant data. But we know these are opportunities to have a significant impact on the GDP, on local GDP and employment levels. The second is looking at a skills program for the renewable sector. And this is looking particularly at hydrogen, where we've got DSI and DHET involved. The next element is reskilling and upskilling of existing workers. I mean, there's a lot of work that's being done in here, but I'm flagging two particular sectors. One is power up, largely driven by Green Cape, which matches employers' demands for skills and competencies with academic institutions. So a curricula can be developed, and if curricula exists, then to train the relevant numbers of students are required for these occupations. So you have a direct feed from training into occupations. The second is in the auto sector. I think this is largely driven by NACAM. It's a very similar initiative, but it links skills with employees' needs. So you're training directly for absorption into the labor market. And the last concluding point is, because there's a huge volume of work taking place, both at a research level and at an implementation level, we've realized there's a need for coordination, failing which we have huge levels of duplication and massive disjuncture in terms of initiatives. So through certain academic institutions, we're pulling together all of this research work. So we create a knowledge platform. So future research will be based on research that's been done, gaps that's being identified. So we're able to create a more efficient knowledge base on skilling activities in South Africa. At the same time, it's around bringing implementation partners together with various initiatives underway so that you directly lead skilling work into the labor markets directly and into jobs. So we're trying to pull this together. There's a massive workshop being held next week on this. And, we will share information as required. Yeah, thank you. I tried my best to keep this within the time frames that I was provided. Thank you.